Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell from the Council on American Islamic Relations, welcoming you to today's episode of CAIR on Air. Thank you so much for joining us. A special thank you to our listeners on American Muslim 360. Today is May 25th, 2021. As you all know, this is a somber day. Today marks exactly 1 year since the murder of George Floyd, since that horrific murder at the hands of Minneapolis police officers that was caught on video and shown all around the world, sparking change, massive change, and also leaving, maybe few too many things the same. And so today, 1 year later, we want to, think back to the murder, think about how the response to that murder has changed our country and our world for the better, and also look at what work is left to be done, what work has not been accomplished, what problems still exist, and what we can do to tackle those problems, and by doing so, carry on the legacy of George Floyd and advance something positive out of this horrific murder that occurred 1 year ago. Let's bring on our two guests who will be discussing this with us today. We have Robert McCaw, the Government Affairs Director of CAIR National, and Zainab Mohammed, leading official with CAIR Minnesota. Assalamu alaikum to both of you. How are you?
Walaikum assalam. Doing very well.
Zainab, how are you doing?
I'm good. Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for joining us again, Zainab. We appreciate it. So, Zainab, let me start with you. You're on the ground in Minnesota. You're part of our Minnesota chapter. You all have been, personally and professionally dealing with this situation in a way that, many of us working on this at the national level, we've been dealing with policy changes and things of that nature, but you've really been on the ground, seeing the community's reaction to this, seeing the family's reaction to this, seeing the protests and all that's happened over the past year. So let me start, Zainab, by asking you, thinking back to a year ago, how did you first learn about what happened to George Floyd? How did you first see the video? And I know what your reaction to it was, the same as everyone else's, but did you expect that this murder would spark the level of social awareness, rally people to respond and say enough is enough? Did you expect to see the community and others, stand up against this, or did you think this would get swept under the rug like so many other murders of Black people at the hands of rogue police officers?
When I remember I was laying on my bed the night that George Floyd was murdered, and I was on Facebook, and an activist here, Nikema Levy Armstrong, had posted something about it, but she hadn't posted the video. And I was just kind of looking into it because that happened in my community, literally 2 blocks from my house. So I'm like, wait, what's going on? And so I look it up, I find the video, I download it, and I put it on my Instagram, and everybody was messaging me on what's going on, what's happening, who is this? And I just remember waking up the next day and like telling my friends, like, we're all going. And a lot of them were like, what's pandemic? Like, we don't know if we can go or what's going on. And we don't want to, you know what I mean? We don't want to get sick, get our family sick. But I just felt the need that I just needed to go to the site, see what's going on. So I knew if it had that level of impact on me, because I hadn't slept that night because I just kept looking at the video, I couldn't imagine how the world was going to react to it. There was just something different about it. And there was a number of other protests I had gone to prior to that. Jamar Clark's, Philando Castillo's, a number of other high-profile cases. But this one was just different because how can you not watch that video and not think to yourself the inhumanity in the individual doing it, and the inhumanity in anybody who could look at it and not want to do anything about it. And I think today I think with the verdict, people feel not necessarily at peace, but they have a lot more like resilience. Like they know that with their work and the work they've done on the ground, something came out of it, and that's just the verdict. But if nothing changed with the laws, with the people that uphold it, then we know that there's going to be more George Floyd. And so I think there's going to be a lot more say in what happens from here on across the Twin Cities.
Yes, inshallah. And, Zainab, as we think back to it, at the time we thought it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds or so. And then we found out later 9 minutes. And I think, there have been so many horrific police killings, but this one was remarkable because you could sit there and watch it happening in slow motion, right, over such an extended period of time. And at any moment in that video, Derek Chauvin and the other officers, could have stopped and saved this man's life, God willing, but they refused. And it was just remarkable to watch that. And so it wasn't that this is the first time it's ever happened, not at all, but there was something so horrific about that video. And you can only imagine what the reaction would have been if that video had not existed. And all we had was the press release put out by the Minneapolis Police Department to describe that incident. And so that, again, so much credit goes, alhamdulillah, to the person who filmed and recorded that murder, kept their camera on it, because that video is what really sparked everything that came later. All the policy changes we've been pursuing, the protests, even the arrest and prosecution of Derek Chauvin, right? Because initially he wasn't arrested. He was put on leave. So anyway, thank you, Zainab. Let's go to you, Robert. So Robert, talk to us about what this is. How did this change the conversation at the policy level, the policy reform level nationally about police reform? Or was the conversation even happening in a serious way before this?
The conversation, if you think it's stalled now, it had really been stalled. I came to CAIR in 2011, and in the aughts, the End Racial and Religious Profiling Act had been introduced by Conyers and Ben Cardin. And this bill, even under democratically held Congresses and presidencies, could not pass. And we saw the issue of racial profiling stall in Congress because of large police unions and their activism. And it took a murder in broad daylight with people pleading, don't murder this man, to the police just ignoring them and murdering. It took that to really spur Congress in the last year to introduce the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And this act passed in the last Congress. It passed in March, but now we find it once again stalling mainly along partisan lines, with Republicans holding out for a few reasons. But, in talking about what does the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act do, it would end qualified immunity as proposed in the House. It would strengthen mens rea requirement. It would develop a national and public police misconduct database, end the militarization, i.e. the transfer of weapons from the military to local police departments. Not all the way, but it would limit it in a big way. It would also limit the use of force by law enforcement. Chokeholds would be prohibited by federal police, and would also any local police receiving grants from the federal government couldn't use chokeholds. It would also restrict other maneuvers. So, you couldn't just, if you're a police officer, shoot someone unless you truly feared for your life, just not in the conduct of doing your work. It also includes those End Racial Profiling Act restrictions on racial and religious profiling by nationality. And it creates a great new forms of accountability where the Department of Justice can now investigate, and where state attorney generals are given the funds to investigate and go into local cases and have more powers where they previously didn't. The whole issue is, though, this bill, everyone hoped at the 1-year anniversary on the 25th of today, we were really hoping that it would be passed. Just last month in April, members of the House met with Senate lawmakers. So you had Republican Senator Tim Scott meeting with Democratic Senator Cory Booker, Dick Durbin meeting with Lindsey Graham, and then the House author, Representative Karen Bass, and supporters like Brian Fitzpatrick and others. They met on April 29th to talk about how it was imperative that this bill passes. But there are concerns, especially when you hear from, House Majority Whip James Clyburn saying that this bill, what will be agreed upon in the Senate, is going to be different than what was passed in the House. And they might actually have to compromise on qualified immunity in this police reform bill. And for those that don't know, qualified immunity is it allows an officer not to be financially liable if they violate someone's civil rights. But we're hopeful that this will pass. Today, the family of George Floyd met with President Biden and Kamala Harris behind closed doors. In the afternoon, they spoke with Speaker Pelosi and again the representative that authored this bill and a civil rights icon herself, Representative Karen Bass. And later this afternoon, again, they're meeting with Senators Booker and Republican Senator Tim Scott, where they're going to, with their family attorney, Benjamin Crump, who's also working on Malcolm X case issues. They are going to re-impress upon these senators the need to pass a police reform bill. And I know it's not going to be the most perfect bill, but like I said earlier, we've been waiting 20 years for police reform in the Senate, and this might be the opportunity we're looking for. But we have an action alert at CAIR. Other civil rights organizations have an action alert. You can click on the link that's being provided. We really need you to reach out to your senator and say, we support the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We need to have police reform legislation now.
Absolutely. So Zainab, tell me this, what's happening on the ground in Minnesota today? What sort of changes are you all still fighting for at the local level in response to George Floyd's murder? I mean, you've gotten a lot of reforms done at the local level, is my understanding. And obviously, Derek Chauvin was prosecuted and convicted, and the other officers are slated to go to trial later in the year. So, what's some of the positive change that's happened at the local level, and what changes are you still fighting for down at the local level up in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think first, the most noticeably biggest change has been people waking up and willing to demand for change. We have our own legislation, kind of much like the ones at the federal level: qualified immunity, no knock warrant, a number of other bills, police accountability bills. Those did pass in the Minnesota House as of March, and right now they're in the conference committee and up for negotiation with the Minnesota Senate. We don't know how those will turn out. We know there'll be a special session this coming June. We're hoping they'll all pass, especially because this happened here and it affects the community on a deeper level. And as far as a local level, there's other cities are also taking to their own hands on their public safety, what that looks like them, and taking accountability, putting police and law enforcement to accountability. Yeah, but today's I think today, being the 25th of May, people are feeling heavy, and it's kind of in the air. There's obviously a lot of media here, but a number of activists are on the ground and speaking to people. There's events happening all across the Twin Cities to kind of have deeper conversations on how to change public safety that look for each community.
Gotcha. Now, Robert, let me take it back to you. So I know that I think we all expect that obviously the Justice and Policing Act as it stands is not going to pass the Senate. That's the whole point of their ongoing negotiation. And I understand, as you mentioned, that qualified immunity is one of the major holdups in their discussions. The Republicans want to protect it. The Democrats would like to obviously change that legal standard as it currently exists. Do you, putting on your political prognosticator's hat, do you think they're going to get something done, or do you think the gaps are just too big?
I think the gaps are too big, and that's why I think you have the majority whip, James Clyburn, making statements already like there will have to be compromise on something like qualified immunity for this policing reform bill to pass in Congress. I think there was support at the grassroots level for just a complete ban on military transfer of equipment to the police, and even Democrats listened to big police unions on that and allowed some transfer of equipment, at least in relation to terrorism, which is really a catch-all term. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that became even weaker in the Senate. It really shouldn't be like this, but I think if you're going to get this passed along party lines, as long as you need 60 votes in the Senate, this bill is going to be held up with Republicans until they at least get some of the things they want. And that includes more protections for police that violate the civil rights of those who they're supposed to protect. I haven't heard a lot about the mens rea, is how you say it. You're the attorney here. You know the Latin better than I do. But the idea that a police officer is not held accountable if they didn't willingly
if
or
they didn't
knowingly.
know that what they
Yeah.
were doing was,
Yeah.
wrong, was illegal, because something, the exact same thing just about had happened before and it had been determined to be a violation of civil rights. So it's like a ridiculous catch-all situation where
Yeah.
you almost can never prove it, because number one, things are very rarely exactly identical, and even similarities, you can probably find enough differences if you're a good lawyer to try to distinguish it. So it's a ridiculous shield that affords public officials the chance to get away with a lot of wrongdoing. Zainab, at the local level in Minnesota, you mentioned some of the reforms we've seen at the police level. Can you talk about the role the Muslim community has played in advancing positive change? I think one of the great things that we've seen throughout this incident is a reminder that the Muslim community does not just care about issues of Islamophobia, right? But that police brutality and national security overreach and all those other government abuses, those are Muslim issues too. We care about those things because they harm people. And as Muslims, we care about justice for all people. And alhamdulillah, we had Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, who led the prosecution, assembled the prosecution team that was able to convict Derek Chauvin, which, the evidence is strong, but it is never easy to convict an officer of murder, especially to get him on the highest charges they wanted. So can you talk about the role the Muslim community has played in Minnesota?
Yeah, Minnesota has a large Muslim community, but it also has a large Black Muslim community. Obviously, issues with policing has been a long-time thing for Minnesotan Muslims, whether it's from the FBI's knocking on their doors without having any type of evidence and kind of harassing Muslim community, or it's law enforcement stopping and murdering young Muslim men, like in the case of Isaac Adden that happened a few years ago here in Minnesota, or in a number of other cases. So they're also on the ground every day. They understand that being a Muslim in America is hard, and being visibly Muslim is hard. But when it comes to law enforcement, it's harder. You have somebody that's coming from rural Minnesota that has never been around a Muslim person for the first time, and it a lot of times for the Muslim community. But they're in the fight, whether it's through Islamophobia, whether it's fighting for legislation, or being on the ground and going to legislators, prosecutors' homes to demand for bigger charges, like being at Pete Orbit's house, or Mike Freeman's house. They've had the biggest voices.
Gotcha. Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. And Robert, I think you're about to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that CAIR National works with all our chapters across the country in setting up click and send action alerts, connecting Muslim activists to their local city council people, to their state officials, legislatures, the governor. CAIR Minnesota has just been knocking it out of the park, mobilizing tens of thousands of people to send, tens of thousands more emails to their elected officials across the state. And they've been keeping up the pressure at the local city council level, at the state legislative level. These are, the high standard numbers that we're encouraging other CAIR chapters to aspire to. So CAIR Minnesota is just knocking it out of the park and mobilizing just electronically and connecting Muslims and our allies in the community to their elected officials. So I just had to put that out there, and thanks Zainab and the rest of the CAIR Minnesota staff of working so hard to mobilize Muslim and allied activists and connecting with their elected officials to pass legislation like this.
Absolutely. So, look, Zainab, final question as we wrap up here. There are other active investigations into police shootings. I think the Wright case is still ongoing. I believe Keith Ellison is taking over that one as well. Any updates on that situation and what you're expecting to see done there?
Yeah, well, that case happened just the night before Ramadan, and that obviously was a large case that made into national news. And there've been a lot of change with that case in the sense that Brooklyn leadership decided to listen to the community and to the activists which would include things like starting a new department of mental health. Who's going to have to respond to.
Zainab, I think your video went out. Robert, are you hearing Zainab okay, or is her video going out?
In and out.
Zainab, yeah, we lost your video. Your video is going in and out a bit. Try turning off your camera and continue your answer. That might help if you can. I think you're just having a connection problem. Oh, we lost Zainab.
No, we lost her.
Okay, we lost her. All right.
That is the way of the internet.
Yeah, sounds like we got through most of the things that I want to make sure we heard from the local ground in CAIR, Minnesota. So thank you, Zainab, so much for joining us. Oh wait, we have her back. Let's see if she's here, so we can give her a proper send off.
Making dua.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, Zainab. Can you hear us? No, we lost her.
There we go again.
All right, so
it's all right.
On the Dante Wright case, so that is still ongoing. Keith Ellison, I believe, has taken that case over, and I think there'll be some consideration whether or not increased charges need to be filed against the officer in that case. And then obviously there are several other cases that everyone's tracking around the country. So as we think of George Floyd 1 year after his murder, we're not only thinking of George Floyd, but all the other George Floyds that are out there, and also trying to think of what can be done to make sure that there are no more George Floyds, God willing. So the struggle continues at the national level and the local level. A big thank you to Zainab Ahmed and the great work that she and CAIR Minnesota are doing. Thank you to Robert for the work you're doing at the policy level, and to all of the many organizations that have been on the front lines of this fight, even before the media was paying attention, even before people knew about George Floyd. The people who have been calling out this issue and telling us we had to take it seriously. A special thank you to them. So thank you all for joining us for today's episode of CAIR on Air. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday at 3 p.m. for our next episode, inshallah. Until then, assalamu alaikum. May peace be.
Assalamu alaikum.